I wonder if Mrs. Ridout would be able to tell us when the threshing machines were introduced. She mentioned about the threshing machines. Is it early 19th century?
Yeah, so 1853 she was married, so we're sort of looking at that period of, I suppose it's, yeah, somebody's going to tell me, because there's the luggers, aren't there, that were the movement that sort of wanted to ensure that working by hand was...
Oh, the Luddites.
Sorry, what did I call them?
Luggers.
Swing riots.
Yes.
Swing riots.
Swingles and the swing riots. Thank you very much.
So
indeed.
the Luddites were originally from Nottingham, and they were the men who were smashing up the machinery that was used to make stockings, and they went into the factories and smashed them up because the one new frame could do the work of about 6 or 7 people. So every time one of those new machines was brought in, a load of men were made unemployed, and in those days there was no unemployment benefit, there was no redundancy money, nothing like that. So if you lost your job, basically you starved. So that's what they did. They went into the factories and smashed up the machines. And quite rightly, as this lady said, outside in the countryside, there was the swing riots where it was Captain Swing. So you had Captain Ludd, who was in charge of the Luddites in the factories, and then you had Captain Swing, who was rounding up everybody. And it's a mythical creature, really, mythical character, I suppose. Captain Ludd and Captain Swing, nobody really knows who they were, if they were really real people or whether it was just a nickname for the person who was the leader. But in the countryside, the same thing happened. They went and smashed up machinery that was doing the work of the local people. And you might notice that my accent is not local to here. I'm from Nottingham. And the Luddites is my thing, so yeah, absolutely. So what Michele was saying, this is what I did, yeah.
What date are you talking about?
The date of the Luddites, it started in 1811, and the last Luddite activity was in 1817, and at that point they'd hanged a lot of Luddites in York that year. It was absolutely horrendous because it became a hanging offence. You could be executed for it. It became a capital offence to destroy the machines, or even to plot to destroy the machines if they suspected you of planning to go.
Later, Captain Swing.
Captain Swing's later. It's in the
and there were the 6 with the handling torches. And local.
Absolutely, yeah, and it was all about the workers combining as well, wasn't it? About them getting together in unions and things like that.
Google says about threshing machines that it was first invented circa 1786 by the Scottish engineer Andrew Michael, and the subsequent adoption of such machines was one of the earlier examples of the mechanisation of agriculture. So and that fits in very much with your dates.
So by the time Maria was doing her carrying, well into the Industrial Revolution, absolutely, yeah, yes. Thank you for that, and thank you for Google.
It's a brain.
Thank you. Yeah.
I got there before you, but just to make
The Google challenge. Yeah. And it's one of those funny things, isn't it? Because in your mind you think. So I was just talking earlier, wasn't I, about how that her job probably wasn't as romantically as enjoyable as I was maybe portraying it. But that idea of just getting up and going out and knowing that's what you had to do, and you had to get from there to there, and being outdoors. So many times I'm sitting on the computer, or I've got electronic goods around me, and what I really want to do is be outside, and I want to be with nature, and I want to see these sorts of, this season changing, and so that felt very important to me. And then as soon as you look into it through her life, she would have seen these changes happening around her. And it's a tricky one, isn't it? My dad was a coal miner, and I think, isn't that fantastic that people don't have to go down coal mines anymore? But then you hear about communities whose lives have been devastated. So there's always positives and negatives in everything, isn't there? And it's how you look at life, I suppose. Both sides.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you have to put your hand up. Hold on a minute, Mr. Horace.
So I was just going to say that it strikes me that Mrs. Ridout wouldn't have been the poorest of the poorest of the poorest, because she would have had the 2 donkeys and she would have had some capital to spend to buy the goods before the people paid her. Would that be right?
I think from what we can gather, she would have had, when she was working, she had a fairly healthy lifestyle. And I think probably at the peak with having a shop as well, that must have been, and both of them working, that must have been quite a healthy time. But it definitely appears to be that when her husband died and things slipped, there's no headstone for her. She was buried in a pauper's grave. So
she's recorded as a pauper in 1871, living with her brother.
So they were both poor.
Yeah. She went down after. So the census records her actually as a pauper, living with her brother in 1871.
What age was she when she died?
1814 to 1886, if you can do the maths.
Late 70s, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was
70s.
quite a good age. Yeah, she was.
But like we say, that she might have worked really hard all the way through when she could. But then if there isn't a job to be done, if she's not going to be able to get quick enough to all the way into Salisbury in her 70s, that's the.
She was living with her brother James Corp at the end, who was an agricultural labourer. So presumably he was supporting her at that point.
Could you just say a little bit about how she came to your attention? What knocks her out as this character in history? What you talked about the picture, which
painting,
was a lovely detail. The painting. Could you just say a bit more about that? Thank you.
So what happened was that Michele came to me and asked me if I would write the script for this performance. Because it's part of the Characters of Cranbourne Chase project. So there's a few different characters which are very specific to the area. I think is there a Roman soldier, and there's a medieval woman as
Rachel
well.
will tell
There's a few different characters. An Iron Age woman, yeah.
Medieval and
it's a medieval one as well. So these characters are all very specifically local to this area, and
my interest came
from the picture, wasn't it? And there's
we
the
hear
picture on the front of the book, isn't there? On the front.
So there's this amazing picture that's at
This is a
Salisbury
painting.
Museum.
This is one of my sources. Is the Sarum, is that how you say it? Chronicle, which is published by the group, and they did a particular article which I got hold of on carriers generally, but there was quite a bit about her in there, and they used her portrait as the picture on the outside. So
unfortunately, we couldn't have the portrait here. We really wanted a copy of it so we could display it. So when people came in, we could, and we wanted it at the end to hold it up so that you could actually see the portrait that she was describing. So that's what I tried to do at the end of the script. Was so
that's
that
my printout, which is not terribly
so
good
that you
because the colours are not right.
Realise as the audience, this is what she's doing. She's describing her in the herself in the portrait.
Bigger than that. It covers.
Oh, it's huge, yeah.
Big
I mean, it's
picture,
much better. That's a printout from my printer, which is not very good colouring.
And we were just having a conversation about the painter. He was quite well known, but he'd up until that point, he seemingly had been painting sort of vases.
Well, Frank Brooks was very local. He lived in Bishopstone at this time, so he would have walked home with her. But he did sketches about 2 or 3 years before the painting happened. So whether that was just him playing, but in his early career, he entered an enormous number of art exhibitions, and he came in kind of second and third. And when you read the description of this thing, it was a vase of peonies or a vase, I mean, really dull. I've never seen the paintings, so I don't know how good they were, but his sketchbooks do include pastoral things of Harnham Slope and Harnham Bridge, and so I mean he was looking at more pastoral scenes, but he would have been a whimsical youth when he was following this older lady.
Hence why he said the old lady. She was indignant about it, because at the time she wasn't that old.
And I think
it's down to him then.
I think if there hadn't have been a painting, we would have known very little. Ridout was a name at my school when I was in Poole. My friends in my year were Ridout. So the other thing was that we don't know enough about women's stories. They're so little written down. And it was an opportunity to bring about, but also this carrying as well. That whole area opened up a piece of history that I hadn't sort of come across really.
I'd heard of carriers before, but John, you found a map, didn't you, with all the different carriers who came into Salisbury, and there's so many of them. It's like a spider web with Salisbury in the middle, isn't it, with all these
there's a really good
paths and roads.
Picture in here of them all tied up sort of along the side of the Salisbury market, and it's just, it's a huge number of them. With obviously had that, well, goodness only knows where all the horses were. They must have been parked in the pubs or whatever, because they're not shown. But quite. So it must have been a real bustle and getting them in and out, and
the DVD of yesteryear.
Yes.
This is it.
The name of the book, please.
This is it's the Sarum Chronicle. It's published by the Sarum Group. You can look them up online. They're basically a charitable group, and this is issue 19, 2019. If you're interested, that's where the article comes from. They obviously publish these, and there's a number of different articles. It's a really good chronicle if you're interested.
What I found interesting when I was looking through it was that the onset of the railways, in fact, made the carrier's job even more important.
Yeah.
Because more goods were coming into the sort of major places, and then they were distributing it out to the villages.
Yeah. So
it's sort of counterintuitive, really, isn't it?
Can I just mention as well is the Salisbury project, Her Stories.
Yes, that's Her Salisbury story.
Yeah. Women, of which that Maria was one of those.
Yeah, that's where I got.
We're really chuffed that. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Heather's here with us, and we did draw from the fact that there is a Her Story is fantastic in itself to be able to.
Because the story associated with the painting, and the painting was only bought by Salisbury Museum they were given a donation that they spent in 1983, so it's not always been there. So this is a relatively revived interest in her, although the story has been known locally because there's still relatives of the Ridouts in the Chalke Valley.
Any other questions? Yes, this.
Can you tell us some more about you mentioned the petition being got up for a girls' school in Salisbury. Can you tell us?
Yeah, that I came across some research. Mrs. Saunders, who had a girls' school, and she was campaigning for girls to take public examinations, which it was just a lovely contrast to the idea that if you don't learn to read and write, or if you haven't got the opportunity to read and write, it's something whenever I use historical characters, especially with children in an audience, it feels very important to.
Salisbury was very lucky. There was a lot of effort to educate girls, particularly through the church groups. Quite a lot of some of the women that I've researched all were taught to read and write through Sunday schools and particular interests of vicars' wives or something like that. So there was quite a good interest. There wasn't they won't be, and all the villages had schools which had children attending from about 1830.
So there's a school in Stratford, Tony. You can still see the pikes and part of the wall. Yeah. What was it? With the public examination you mentioned, was that so-called school certificate? Is that what it was for?
I would imagine so.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
I don't know 100% which exams it actually would be, but you would have thought so, wouldn't you? The same exams that I would imagine that the boys were taking. So she thought that it would be a good idea for women to be educated as well as men. How literacy changes over the centuries is really fascinating, because during the Civil War, during the 1600s, the vast majority of people could read and write. People think, in the past, everybody who, if you weren't a wealthy aristocrat, then you wouldn't be taught to read and write. But the vast majority of very ordinary people could read and write during the Civil War. And there's evidence of this because there were so many pamphlets and leaflets that were produced. There wouldn't have been any point in producing all of these documents if nobody could read them. And they were passed around very ordinary people, people like the ranters and the diggers and people like that had lots and lots of documents and flyers and leaflets and songs and broadsheets and things.
When did printing presses in those days? I'm a bit confused by that.
Well, there were lots of. There was in the 1600s, yeah.
1600?
Yeah, during the Civil War.
Printing came in about 1450.
Yes. Yeah, there were Bibles that had been printed by then and so on as well. So people were able to read and distribute pamphlets and things. So.
Yes, some people are often confused because we see a lot of crosses on certificates. That doesn't mean to say they couldn't read nor write. They might have taken time with their name, and in a vestry or in a social situation to get things done, they would have.
Sometimes they would have just made a mark, wouldn't they, rather than writing their name? Yeah.
You mean like when you sign for things these days?
They couldn't read or write. That's not true.
Yeah. Very much so. We're
going back. Well, we're going backwards, aren't we?
Yeah.
When someone comes with their screen to you at the door, do you put your
absolutely.
signature on there? I certainly don't. It does go.
Yeah.
Just a twinkle.
And children's writing is deteriorating because they're not writing, but I'm not doing cursive handwriting. I do private tuition, and some of my students, really, their writing is dreadful, and they have to really practice it, because the vast majority of the time they're not writing, and the exams are still where you have to handwrite your exams, and writing for 2 or 3 hours. It's
My
very
grandson
tiring.
Sam tells me his great saviour is they are now going to permit keyboard writing rather than handwriting, because his writing is appalling.
Yes, yeah. So
It's only being recorded. No, we think keep practising your writing.
I was going to say one of my students is actually dyslexic, and I've been trying to campaign to get so that he can actually type his answers in the exams, but the schools are very reluctant to do this, very reluctant to allow it. They much prefer you to write your answers. So, okay. Any other questions about anybody wants to ask Jan about her research, because it's so interesting.
I think Heather follows better position.
Was the Keats was that?
That's
Really?
our interpretation of a very lovely poem.
I mean, it is a real poem, and it is written by Keats. Yeah.
Wondered if she was known for her love of Keats.
No,
If we could have asked her, she'd say absolutely.
That was a bit
And
of artistic
Wordsworth.
license,
And
because
all the
what it
others.
was that we wanted it to be so that it was like the wheel of the year. So she started off telling you about her job, and then it's spring, and then the summer, and then autumn, and it was just these nice traditions and sort of lyrical descriptions of the seasons, and I just thought she'd like to read the poem Autumn, because she'd learnt to read, and she'd be quite proud of the fact that she could read. That's how Michele performed it, wasn't it? So that she was, now she's learnt to read. She wants to read everything, and she's reading these lovely poems, and the poetry, the words are actually reflecting the world that she sees around her.
Just did need to see the sun, didn't we?
Yes, it would have been nice.
Definitely been nice. A friend that didn't come to
No, not
visit us
today.
today.